And you are live. Hi, welcome back to House Education. It is Thursday, January 23rd, and we have guests from the Vermont School Board Association joining us. Just a little bit of context here, and I'm sure they will give us more. But last session, the House Education Committee had extensive testimony from the field as we faced the challenging finance numbers in the education fund and the prospect of school budgets and then the reality of so many school budgets failing. We had a lot of testimony from school board members and from the School Board Association. And in the wake of that, there has been a lot of work in different places trying to better organize and get a sense of what is the reality of our whole education field right now. What are the challenges and what are some of the possible directions for reform? Obviously, we heard a massive plan yesterday. We tasked the commission on the future of public education to do that. And it turns out before either of those had even started, the School Board Association was doing their own work on it. And so as we continue to just get as much information as possible, I think it's helpful for us. We thought it would be helpful to get an understanding of the work they did on creating their own task force and sort of status report on where we are and where we might go. And maybe you want to provide a little more context about that and introduce yourself.
Okay, good morning. My name is Gloria Smith, and I'm the president of Vermont School Association, and I'm joined today by.
Yes, my name is Claire Wool. I'm a resident of Burlington, and I chair the task force. And I'm the school board chair, and have been for 8 years.
I'm going to ask both of you to speak up a little because it's a long
Okay.
way between.
We'll project we'll do our best to project our voices. I'm just gonna go right into why we're here. I know you guys have a busy day and we really respect and appreciate the time that you take to hear from us. As a result of a VSBA approved resolution, the Vermont School Board Association formed a task force on collaboration to benefit all students. What we wanted to do was address those long-standing challenges that we have seen between the AOE, the State Board of Education, and all, the different education systems of implementing that are essential to implementing high-quality public education, as is mandated by law. They are all, the three are interconnected. The Agency of Education, the State Board of Education, that relationship is really important. The task force was formed by that resolution that came from Addison County. We reached out to Claire to see if she wanted to lead this effort. The task force of collaboration, you have the slide. Oh, let me share the slides. I'm not sharing yet. Hold on 1 minute. Sorry about that. Okay,
Yeah.
so the task force for collaboration was formed by the VSBA, as I said, by a resolution that came from Addison. The purpose was to assess the concerns of the State Board of Education and the Agency of Education, and the governor and the legislature. So the goal was really to improve that leadership and the governance and the outcomes for public education. They had monthly meetings. The task force was joined not just by, we had one representative from each of our regions to make sure that we had not just that proportional representation, but we made sure that we were fair. The task force was also, the main recommendation that we had as leaders was that it was a solution-oriented approach, that we were not going to do any finger pointing, that this is where we were at the moment. How do we move the work that we need to do forward? You can see the members of the, of the task force here. I don't need to read them for you, but you can see also all of our regions there. And the last part that I would say on this is that we had focus groups with different leaders. We met early on with the Secretary of Education. We met with the chair of the State Board of Education. We met with VSBA. I participated in as many meetings as I could, and Claire and Sandra, which is with us today, led the effort of the task force. And we're going to move now into the recommendations of the task force and those key findings. I'm going to pass it on to Claire.
Sure. Well, I definitely learned more acronyms doing this. The VSA, the VPA, the VCSBA, the VTCLA, the VASBO. So our goal was to reach out to everyone across the state that is impacted with the Agency of Education or State Board. The goal, as we said, was an inclusive process. We're talking back in 2023. This resolution was brought together by school boards to say, we have little to none state leadership in the Agency of Education. We had a secretary that has departed. There's a vacancy, there's a substitute. We looked at org charts that were currently in 2023 showing a 2018 org chart of the agency. 12 pages, many vacancies. We learned more people leaving the agency than scoring high talent to our state agency. We were concerned as school board members, and we reached out in this arm of the VSBA. Thank goodness it exists to be able to voice those concerns. Every year, we look at resolutions that work for the benefit of the state and the pupils that we serve. So in looking at how we made up the data that we reported out to you to look for recommendations, it was critical that we spoke to everybody. And everybody, there was such a resounding response to, yes, we'd love to give you feedback. Yes, we'd love to fill out the survey. I've contacted every chair in the state of Vermont and asked them to fill out a survey to give us their individual feedback. That being said, in collecting all this information, as Sandra said, and when we spoke to, at the time, interim secretary Heather and interim secretary at the time, Zoe, we shared, this is our goal, is to present how we can support the state board, how we can support the Agency of Education by these recommendations to our state elected officials to hear how these are impacting the state overall. In that regard, the number one thing was looking at how school boards access the Agency of Education, and data drives decisions. It drives budgets, it drives all the management, and our key findings were in sharing with the agency was to develop a data plan for the state, not only just a better website, but looking at comparable websites throughout the United States. It exists. There's transparency. It's current. And we lack timely, accurate, and publicly accessible data for districts. So we can see how we all get into this position operating in silos because we lack state leadership. And we supported the agency and the state board and asking them, what are the challenges that you find? And they were very open. We received incredible feedback and letters from now Secretary Saunders. We received a long letter from Jennifer Samuelson, who I know gave testimony, and I listened to her testimony to you the other day, and the hardships that the state board has gone through. So we, again, conducted an organizational review of the AOE to improve staffing, resources, and operational capacity. The same goes for the state board. If Act 66 took away all of their authority or, policies, what are their vision statement? There hasn't been a vision statement since 2018. The State Board of Education. So we wanted to put this all together for elected leaders, for you to share how are we staffing, how are we funding these critical organizations or departments in our state leadership. So the key findings, State Board of Education, just as I shared before you, the recommendations for the state board to ensure nonpartisan leadership, adequate support, only because when elected officials, I know in reading all of your bios and learning about you, when new officials are elected, the transfer of information, maybe it shouldn't be a bipartisan appointment. Maybe it should be something that has more stability and structure rather than partisanship affiliation. All school boards have no party affiliation. Require the state school board of education to apply a quality of standards to their work. So again, looking at ways to support these two critical units of government and power. key findings, existing legislation, new laws, insufficient capacity. So yesterday was incredibly powerful to listen, as a leader in education here as well. But our recommendations were, there are so many current policies that we're working on, that the agency hasn't had any time or leadership now with the new leadership that they've been able to follow up and see the success of those legislative laws that you've all passed. So coming clean to say, in all the work that you spend here in this wonderful capital, how are we doing on those laws that we passed? What's the report? And it's unfair to say, Zoe, in 6 months, do you have any idea? So through time, I'm thrilled with the stable leadership that we have. It was nice to hear someone own it yesterday and present it, but that has been lacking. And our goal was as genuine as can possibly be 2 years ago to say, oh my goodness, thank goodness they agreed on a commission to study this, because it can't just be our voices. But that was ultimately, the response from Chair Samuelson and the Secretary of Education. We agree with the key points of this task force. And ultimately, we're following state law. We're only asking for these state agencies to follow the law. So that is, if there's one big takeaway, it's presenting them with the statute, and giving it's included in your report, and to say, please follow the law, and please let us know and they did let us know the areas that you're incapable of following the law because you need either funding, support staff, or organization. Does that make sense?
So the last part is our conclusion, that the responsibility and accountability. The task force recommendations are sort of launch the work. You have to take into context that this was created before, this accelerated process that we've been right now. But to me and to our organization, the task force work underscores the need for non-partisan collaboration and data-driven decisions to ensure that Vermont provides high-quality inclusive education for all students. With the right leadership and resources, Vermont can continue to build on its commitment to public education, a core tenet of our democratic society. Efforts like the task force laid that strong foundation, having all of the different agencies collaborate. So, we're here to answer questions so that we can, with you, strengthen public education system and deliver equitable and high-quality education opportunities for all Vermonters. And that's the end of our slideshow. You know how to reach us, but we're here also to answer any specific questions. We were not going to read through the report, but that is sort of like the key findings that we have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Does that make sense?
Yep, the full report is posted
Yes.
for today to read some of the further narrative in detail. Questions from the committee?
Thank you. This is really a great effort, and it's glad we brought the document in front of the committee to look at. Did you say that among those surveyed were in fact the Agency of Education and the State Board of Education? And did you find that sort of like they were perfectly willing to sort of talk about their own shortcomings? I mean, we had the State Board in here the other day, and they're up against it because they simply have no resources.
Yeah, $70,000 budget. Yes, the initial conversations, and again, to humanize who we all are and working in this capacity. The original resolution had said the failures of the Agency of Education and State Board. And we knew that when we originally called them to say, we're about to kick it off, it's instrumental that we spend time with you and talk. And at that time was still Heather as the interim. We said, let's remove that word failures. Let's just work, because it has failed schools. It has impacted the state in a negative way. This lack of funding, lack of leadership, lack of vision, lack of data, the gamut. But if we're really going to get somewhere, let's not be Debbie Downers. Let's really look at how we support you. And with that, it diffused the initial call, following subsequent calls, it was, this is what the task force is hearing from their communities. This is the survey information that we reviewed. And then absolutely, I wouldn't say wholeheartedly, and their response to us, which we can share, was positive and said, yes, we acknowledge what you're saying is true. Underfunded, difficult to get legal services, challenges in this regard. And, Zoe entered an agency that, as you just heard in your first meeting, lack of support staff to be able to potentially deliver critical information that the state needs for you to make decisions. So we are in a unique situation.
So they're working towards that data. Are we there yet? We're not. But, I think they're open doors for that collaboration. There's still a lot of shortcomings. But we are working.
And I think also in hearing yesterday's plan, when APA consulting goes away, who's here? Right. And looking at how is this legislative body supporting building up, and building up doesn't mean necessarily attracting talent to work with Zoe to lead that agency of education. That's ultimately, when we call the agency, are we getting the same person? I know all of your commitments. I know, in reading about you, people could say, I can go to you for this, I can go to you, but not sometimes, over the last 5 years, those individuals have either changed or, it's been very challenging for school districts to work effectively at a state, with the state agency.
So real quickly, the state, I'm looking at number 3, revitalizing the state board. It isn't just about finances, it's pretty clear. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts and the feedback that you heard from the field and from the state board themselves about how their structure could change to support the work that we all want them to be doing. We know this role of the state board changed significantly in 2012, whatever the year was. And are we saying, because you use the word independence here, tell me what you're hearing and what you would like to see for the structure of the state board, or what you heard for the structure of the state board, nonpartisan.
Yes, well, in looking, the feedback was quite clearly from superintendents and from board chairs. Those are the only 2 entities that we asked. We asked the superintendents and board chairs to fill out the survey, and then the other organizations that I said the acronyms for. I would say 5 out of the 8, I know there's more than this 12, but there are 2 students, represent school choice, independent schools, live-in schools. So we looked at the makeup of the state board. And that was concerning to people, just making sure, like in your house committees, there's a balance, so that there are individuals that are in that decision-making setting as well.
And also how they balance, it's another thing that we heard quite clearly is how they balance governance, not balance, but how they demonstrate governance, because they are the ones to be sort of modeling for the rest of us. And so transparency, going into executive sessions, just like sharing information, how do they govern themselves and respond to, require them to apply their own PQS, like we said, to their own work. That's something that we heard, because the decisions are not always transparent.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to tell you something new, but that is really important. They are the ones that are modeling for the rest of us, and it's important for them to know that and have the interest of all of our students. So the appointments to the State Board of Education are really critical in having some checks and balances of how they are governing themselves, because and the collaboration between AOE and them is crucial, and that communication is not clear on how there's been so much transition. So there is not a good way of them having a vision, getting to the AOEs, just sort of how we function. And a lot of you guys are familiar with governance of school boards. So that part is also, we heard a lot about that.
One quick follow-up. They talked about the strategic plan that they're trying to build. How do you see that fitting into?
Support, good.
I think it's great that they now have a strategic plan. Yeah, we should have had a
The work.
strategic plan. Yeah, and that helps align the work, because when you have a strategic plan, you could also have a work plan for the year and how they're gonna achieve. Because the other thing is just achieving their work, so we can move the work along. So having a strategic plan, it's a step in the right direction. Now, what are the action steps to that strategic plan and how are we gonna monitor that strategic plan would be critical.
Great.
Left hand talking to the right hand.
Yeah.
Representative Taylor.
Yeah, in one of your slides where you talk about the recommendation for the Agency of Education Capacity and conduct organizational review of the AOE to improve staffing. In those conversations that you had to come to this conclusion, was there any talk about how the expertise isn't in the Agency of Education right now, it's actually in the lower levels of education, and I don't mean lower levels in any derogatory way, but so in my opinion, the school system should almost be a pipeline to somebody wanting to work, if an individual wants to work in the AOE, and that should be the pinnacle of their career. And we're not really set up like that right now. Was there any discussion on how we can move into that kind of a pipeline?
Yeah, we looked at many model districts throughout the United States, and how that works, to your point. And yes, it's always, you graduate to work for the state agency, and that is a high honor. Yeah.
I think you have to take into consideration that it's hard, but I know from other people that might consider working for an agency of education, it's really hard to think that would be the pinnacle of your career if it's the secretary is appointed by the governor. So it makes your department, really susceptible to political whim, instead of being that's about the kids. So if you're in education, you have never shown your politics, you're there for all of your kids. So it's really hard to think about that pipeline if the department is politicized, right? So if and I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to get anybody, you know what I mean? Like, if most of our educators, that moral compass is just so important, right? They want to get to the department and do the work they need to do. They don't want to be spokesmen for whoever the governor is.
Well, and even on the base level financial research.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is the really hard.
I think it's also,
Representative
I'm sorry,
Okay.
important, and I think this is kind of to what you're getting at, is a good teacher should be, using best practices because they're best practices and not because they're hoping for an appointment. And we're definitely going to start to see educational agendas now. We're already seeing them. But that shouldn't influence the materials we select and the way that we teach. I don't know. Did that make sense? You just
Yes, do you have any questions for the witnesses?
Well, no, I guess I'm just, no. All right, right?
That's what I said. I think you bring up a good point. I mean, yesterday they talked about curriculum, shared curriculum, graduation standards. Massive, your talent in whether you're working at a high school, elementary school, technical center, that knowledge helps at the state level. Depending on, if you're tired of, student-centered learning or, and working, providing that leadership. Yesterday, what I heard was, wow, having graduation requirements, having curriculum that, the policies that we've set, and we haven't followed up and as an agency, staying consistent, being a leader throughout the entire state, having that, opportunity to really shine rather than having your necessarily political leaders have filled that role over the last, I would say, 4 years. So it's, I look at it as something that people would gravitate towards, and if we create that environment under Secretary Saunders, I think we would attract people in that role. But it's been damaged so much that people have left that agency more than they wanted to go. Why would you want to go there? They're in such disarray. That's challenging.
It's like Claire was saying, the culture and it's also the pay schedule. scale is problematic too. So, and we have seen a lot of people leave. So I'm not saying that everybody's bad. There's been amazing leaders, amazing people that are leading from behind in the agency of education that we've counted on and that they have all left, right? So we have to
competitive pay
create
as well. Yeah, that's what
competitive
we
pay,
put
be
that in the
able
report
to,
as
and
well.
be able to create that culture so that you are all working together. You create that, that environment and garden so that all of the people there can flourish and part of that. And that brings me to another point that goes with that is that, for example, the State Board of Education, like Claire was saying, on how the positions are filled, they don't represent the majority of our students, right? The majority of our students are publicly educated. The State Board of Education should have appointments that represent that 95%, and then there's a 5% that is from private. So it doesn't have to be even politicized, right? Like, you could just do a representation. 95% of our students are educated in public schools. The State Board of Education should represent 95% of this, there's not a balance, right?
So in yesterday's hearing, yesterday's plan, and I am dedicated to watching all your meetings, and I'm appreciative of the joint sessions as well, because I think that a lot gets accomplished. But I kept thinking, I just hope these elected officials are looking at the Agency of Education and how they're going to support this plan. They're the ones who own, it's all on their shoulders. So starting in this task force recommendation, is really the essence of that. If we don't look at this task force and implement, really, how do we move forward with the overall plan? This is, and I'm not saying that braggadociously, I'm saying it as like, please consider what we've written here. This was all really just matter of fact. It wasn't, there's nothing, oh, I hope, I wish. It's really like, this is essential. This is the core foundation. This is the blueprint.
And to that end, I really appreciate it. If you're looking at the full report, starting on page 15, the chart that just lays out, but in statute right now, what are the duties of the secretary and duties of the state board? And that's just very helpful grounding, I think, for us as we consider the path ahead. And I appreciate Representative Taylor's point. I think something we're going to continue to wrestle with, which is how are our structures set up, and then how are they actually functioning? And so, if we envision this statewide leadership at the agency, it could be sort of the pinnacle. There are culture challenges. There's certainly the pay challenges. A curriculum director is generally going to make more in a small district than at the state level. And that is that's something we've got to wrestle with, how to address that. And then the bigger issue, we heard it raised yesterday as well, it's part of the commission's charge for that reason, which is, what will serve the future state that we're moving towards, as the secretary says, is it an agency of education, where the secretary is appointed by the governor, or is it a department of education that is theoretically less political and a little less susceptible to political winds in any direction? Knowing that shift happened in 2012 here in Vermont. I know for the 5 years I've been here, every year, as we've talked about, our work for the year has been still trying to figure out what's the state board's role, what's the agency's role. And going back to, 2021, Secretary French and Tammy Colby from the state board were really working on that hard. And then something called COVID hit. And so there's been really unresolved questions. That transition never really finished. So do we have to finish that transition, or do we have to think about a different model? But that's one of the charges of the commission for that reason, and probably going to continue to be my sense is a topic of discussion for us in here.
Well said, thank you.
Yeah.
And I would just add, last year we counted up, there were 50 initiatives that elected officials here in the State House asked the Agency of Education.
Right.
So part of the report was, please don't pass any new legislation. And that is asking, this is not a political, like, nobody wins if you're adding more to something that's broken.
Yeah.
We really should focus on good work that has done in the past. So thank you so much, and thanks for your summary.
Thank you, thanks for the report, and I'd encourage for our committee that section, the chart, laying out the duties is just a helpful reference point for us.
And I just want to say at the
Oh,
end,
yeah, Representative Taylor.
No, I was just asking, page 15, is that what?
It starts on page 15,
It keeps
yeah, but
going
it just
up.
goes through. I find it really helpful, and I'm sure that we could ask Ledge Council to also, do something like this, but you've already done a lot of the work.
yeah,
And you have you work with attorneys too, but what are under current law, what are the duties of the agency? What are the duties of the state board?
and I
So
also-
rather than what we think they might be or should be.
yeah, and I also want to underscore that the work of the task force was done before the commission
Yes,
was appointed.
Yes.
So I, working with the commissioner, I also want to say that Dr. McElroy is who wrote the report for the task force, and she sat in all those meetings, right, before we knew that the
Right.
commission was coming, so.
Right.
So there's a duty, a responsibility from you guys to keep the commission as at the center and the heart of any of the discussions as we move ahead on the plans that were unveiled last night. You can't like jump that step.
Yeah, we were so happy to learn that she was the facilitator of the commission. I said,
The chair,
"Oh, this is the chair," excuse me. I was like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, this is someone who has just spent the last year with us on this work, so so beneficial. That never happens. Usually it might be two egos. This was one strong woman who's helping chart the course for the state. I'm very appreciative of her leadership.
I think she was the only, person we could.
Raise your
recruit
hand.
to do that.
But it's, yeah, but you have talented people that
Yes.
are non-political that are doing the whole work, then, let's not take their time for granted.
Yeah, thank you.
While you're there, I mean, we still have a little bit of time, so we might sort of open it up to broader discussion since you're both school board members. What do you see happening at your next school board meeting? Sort of based on everything that came out yesterday and what will be coming out later? Are you too much immersed in the day-to-day governing of your school board and coming up with your budget for next year, or will this all of a sudden start driving your conversations?
I think for the moment, we are all in it, definitely. I was at our board meeting last night and the government came up, but we were all concentrated and we need to put our budgets out, we need to put our reports out, we need to make sure that we have the resources for our students to be able to have what they need for the next school year. So that was the priority last night, passing the budget and making sure that our work was ready. As an organization, I think today we're not prepared to make that statement on what the plan is. We agree with the goals of the plan, right? We're saying all of the right words, but how do we get there? How does it help us achieve the goals that we're looking for? How are they going to collaborate with the commission to make sure that it's a thoughtful process? We have put so much energy through your leadership into creating the commission to have a vision, and so how are those pieces gonna collaborate? And like Claire shared before, the capacity of the AOE and the timeline is a concern, but the Vermont Schools Association for sure will be participating, and we want to be asking the right questions. We do not have a statement today. We have more questions really.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's any
I totally
We
understood.
just, we wanna work with, and we wanna move the work forward. We want it to be a collaborative process, and we don't wanna throw away the commission's work either, right? But a thoughtful process. And I think as board members, everybody, hopefully, we were not gonna have so much disruption like we had last year, or people like wanting to vote no under budgets, so I hope that we can have some leadership on that regard, that the timeline is important. The timeline seemed a little drastic, but, so that we are very thoughtful about how we bring this forward and not create chaos in our districts. Are we gonna be talking about it? Yes, we're gonna be talking. Do we know how we're gonna start this conversation right now? No, a lot of us are in configuration conversations as we speak right now. What does it mean for us, and
Yeah. Since you brought up the topic of configurations, I'm not sure how many of us other than me, but I think we all did kind of look at your map that you had up there. kind of stop me like, because this is going to be one of the topics that we are gonna be probably talking about initially, is what does it mean to move to a different model of school districts that are much broader with a much more sort of robust central office that could probably take on some of the role that the AOE is unable to, and isn't under the same constraints that the AOE is under. I would ask, how has that regional map that you have worked out as a tool for the VSBA?
For the SBA regions.
Yeah,
you're talking about
page
regions.
8.
Yes,
Yes, we're gonna start looking at maps a
because
lot.
we are gonna be looking at how do we divide up our state?
So I would say again, it's in the details, right? You can divide, it has worked for us. We've had 2 representatives from each of our 11 regions for, we have had a thoughtful process of what it means. It depends on, right now, my understanding of those 5, districts that they were created is similarly to how we operate. Some of our work already as, the municipal superintendents, and you're familiar with your site, how we make decisions on calendar, how we make decisions on sharing, whether it is music programs, whether it is high school, the word, lottery, right? Like sharing students in school choice, but it's just about public. So that has worked fine. What would it mean in the context of the plans that were revealed yesterday? It's hard to say, what are going to be the duties of those particular centralized, how are they going to stack them? How are, it's a complete different model. Are we going to change our, it will require so many changes. So, but again, I don't want to, I don't have all the details. So I'm speaking prematurely about something that I don't fully understand. So I don't want to be seen as somebody that is trying to block in.
I assume we're gonna be looking at not just that model, but different models. And so I just wanted to inquire about how VSBA sort of divided up its regions.
Yeah, our regions work fine because of how we do our dues, how we, have equal representation, and we changed the regions. I'm looking at Emily, so we changed the regions.
Can I just follow? on that?
Represent one?
Do we still base it on number of students?
Yes,
The
And that was
VSBA
the
regions
change.
are roughly proportional.
proportional, yes.
Very roughly.
Very roughly.
Yeah.
And on when we created BOCES bill, did we not use the Vermont Superintendent Association regional?
We used a limit of, that there could be up to 6, I think, if I'm remembering the number right. Because we did talk about okay, so if you were doing regionalization, we looked at the superintendent regions and we said, okay, that's 5. That was really, or the, Northwest or whatever we're calling it, is really big. And so allow for sort of one more than what existed in the superintendent regions. So BOCES, that's a board of cooperative education services, is a way that in many states they do some of the work of schools that doesn't have to happen in each building at scale and combine services. Particularly, it could be things like purchasing, it could be things like professional development. I think this is something the committee probably needs to consider, but we've got some real challenges around our therapeutic schools and our placement for some of our highest needs students. And it's a pretty unstable situation, I think, right now in our state. And there's no BOCES that's come in to sort of fill that void yet, but we're continuing to hear from the field about that challenge, but we have designated, we could form up to 6 in the state, taking the BSA number +1.
Listening to you talk about this last part also reminded us that things that we learned from Act 46 was that Act 46 was mostly about outcomes. That's how we sold it to our communities, but most of our communities were concentrated in cost savings, right?
Yes.
And this time around, we are, right now, we're having this conversation about, maps and how it's gonna be, but let's not forget about what the cost drivers are, because there was nothing shared yesterday about the actual bus drivers, right? And you guys are familiar with healthcare, you know, mental health, all of those, in order to, there be something.
Yeah, and even the regions are based roughly on student population.
Yeah.
You know, culture, pay scale problematic, and how will the maps get us to our goal? You know, the map isn't the answer, you know, what is? Yeah.
All right, any other questions from the committee?
Thank you for
Thank you
having
very
us.
much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for
Thank you.
sharing.
Really helpful.
Phone